She was basically single and I was just convenient for now. I discovered this delightful truth about my 3-year relationship when I arrived 15 minutes early to Vino Veritas, that trendy wine bar in downtown Austin where Harper worked happy hours with her marketing agency crew. I had planned to surprise her with dinner reservations at her favorite farm-to-table place on South Lamar, the kind of thoughtful gesture I specialized in as someone who actually paid attention to what made her happy and kept mental notes about restaurants she mentioned wanting to try during our Sunday morning coffee conversations. Instead, I got front-row seats to Harper's unfiltered assessment of our relationship while she gossiped with her coworkers near the exposed brick wall that made this place Instagram-worthy and attracted precisely the kind of creative professionals she aspired to impress with her carefully curated aesthetic. I stood frozen by the entrance, close enough to hear every casual word that would shatter everything I thought we'd built together in our carefully coordinated life that I genuinely believed represented mutual commitment and shared values. Harper was explaining to Sarah and Marcus, her closest work friends who I'd met at agency holiday parties and considered part of our extended social circle, how she was basically maintaining her options while I handled all the boring adult responsibilities like groceries, utilities, rent calculations, apartment insurance, and keeping our downtown loft functional and aesthetically pleasing for her constantly updated social media posts. She described me as someone reliable for practical matters but mentioned she was keeping her eyes open for something more exciting and dynamic, specifically referencing the new creative director named Blake who rode a vintage Triumph motorcycle to work and understood what real passion and spontaneity looked like, unlike her current predictably stable situation. The way she laughed while saying it, that same musical laugh I'd fallen in love with during our first date at Zilker Park 3 years ago when she'd seemed charmed by my planned picnic complete with her favorite wine and carefully selected cheese pairings, made my stomach drop to the polished concrete floor. I watched her gesture with her wine glass, animated and confident in ways I rarely saw her anymore at home, completely unaware that the person funding half her lifestyle and enabling her financial freedom was listening to her dismiss 3 years of what I thought was genuine partnership, mutual respect, and shared dreams about building something meaningful together. She told them how I was useful for now but definitely not long-term material because she had bigger aspirations, how she needed someone with more creative energy and spontaneous spirit, someone who didn't spend Friday nights reading investment books or planning weekend trips to hill country with detailed itineraries that included backup restaurant options, hiking trail difficulty ratings, and weather contingency plans. The conversation continued as she explained her calculated strategy of keeping me around for stability and financial security while actively positioning herself for better opportunities with more exciting people, mentioning how incredibly convenient it was to have someone who remembered to pay bills on time, stock the refrigerator with her preferred organic brands from Whole Foods, handle apartment maintenance issues, and manage our shared calendar while she focused on building her personal brand and networking with more interesting and creative people in Austin's thriving art scene. Her friends seemed genuinely impressed by her practical and strategic approach to relationships, treating love like a sophisticated business merger where she was simply optimizing her resources and maximizing her options until a better offer came along that could provide both financial security and emotional excitement without requiring her to settle for boring stability. I realized with crushing clarity that I had become nothing more than a human ATM with benefits, someone who made her life easier, more comfortable, and financially manageable while she actively and strategically shopped for my replacement among Austin's creative elite who could offer her the lifestyle and excitement she actually wanted. Standing there in my carefully pressed button-down shirt and khakis, holding restaurant reservations I had booked 2 weeks in advance after researching their seasonal menu, wine pairings, and reading customer reviews to ensure everything would be perfect, I felt the complete and devastating collapse of everything I thought we were building toward in our cozy loft with its exposed beams, carefully curated succulent garden that I actually maintained, and shared vision board filled with travel destinations and life goals that apparently meant absolutely nothing to her beyond providing content for her social media presence. The foundation of our shared morning coffee routine with that expensive Breville espresso machine I'd bought her for Christmas, our synchronized Netflix queue full of shows we'd planned to binge together during cozy evenings, our carefully planned weekend farmers market visits where we'd select ingredients for elaborate home-cooked meals that I usually ended up preparing, All of it revealed itself as elaborate theater where only one of us knew we were acting while the other was genuinely invested in building a life together. I backed out of the wine bar before anyone noticed me, walking past the valet stand where Harper's leased BMW sat gleaming under the string lights, a car whose monthly payment I helped cover because I believed partners support each other's success and dreams even when those dreams apparently didn't include me long-term. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was subsidizing the very lifestyle she used to attract someone better than me, funding the independence and social opportunities that let her treat our relationship like a temporary convenience store that stayed open until she found something more exciting and worthy of her time. I drove home through downtown Austin traffic with complete mathematical clarity about what came next, my hands steady on the steering wheel as I processed the undeniable certainty that someone who could describe 3 years of your shared life as basically single had never really been emotionally present for any of it and was simply using you as a comfortable placeholder until something more thrilling came along to sweep her away from her boring but financially beneficial current situation. I spent that entire night systematically erasing myself from our shared life with the same methodical precision I applied to quarterly financial reports at the office. I started with my clothes, carefully folding each shirt and placing them in the large suitcases I'd retrieved from our storage closet, the same ones we'd used for our trip to Colorado last spring when Harper had insisted on staying at that expensive resort I couldn't really afford but had booked anyway because I thought that's what partners did for each other. My finance textbooks came next, the collection of CPA study guides and investment analysis manuals that Harper always complained made our living room look like a library instead of the sophisticated urban space she wanted to showcase on her Instagram stories. I wrapped each book carefully in old t-shirts, protecting the knowledge I'd accumulated over years of building my career while she'd focused on building her personal brand and networking with more interesting people who rode motorcycles and understood what real passion allegedly looked like. The coffee maker was mine, purchased during my first year out of college when I was living in that tiny studio apartment and learning to adult properly, long before I'd met Harper and started subsidizing someone else's lifestyle choices and expensive taste in organic everything. I unplugged it from the kitchen counter where it had sat for 3 years, making our morning routine possible while Harper scrolled through social media and planned her day around avoiding actual work responsibilities. My collection of investment books filled 2 entire boxes, volumes on market analysis and portfolio management that represented hundreds of hours of self-education and professional development that Harper had always dismissed as boring reading material that made me seem uptight and overly focused on practical concerns instead of living in the moment like truly passionate people apparently did. I gathered my personal items from the bathroom, the electric toothbrush and grooming supplies that had shared space with Harper's extensive collection of skincare products and cosmetics that cost more than my monthly grocery budget and somehow always needed immediate replacement whenever her credit card balance got uncomfortably high. The process took me through the entire night as I methodically removed every trace of my presence from the loft that had felt like home until I discovered it was actually just an expensive backdrop for Harper's social media content and her strategy of maintaining financial stability while shopping for better romantic options. I left behind all the shared items we'd accumulated together, the furniture we'd selected during weekend shopping trips, the decorative items that Harper had chosen to create the perfect aesthetic for her carefully curated online presence, the kitchen appliances we'd registered for during that brief period when I'd thought we might actually be building towards something permanent and meaningful. The hardest part was leaving behind the succulent garden we'd created together on the balcony, those small plants that Harper always forgot to water but that I'd maintained faithfully because I'd believed they represented something growing and thriving between us rather than just another Instagram prop that required my constant attention and care to survive. I wrote a simple note on a piece of paper from my desk drawer, the same desk where I'd spent countless evenings working on freelance projects to supplement my income and help cover Harper's increasingly expensive lifestyle choices and spontaneous purchases that she justified as investments in her personal brand and professional development. The note said exactly what needed to be said without drama or explanation, just a clear statement of the new reality that Harper had inadvertently created through her honest assessment of our relationship status and her strategic approach to optimizing her romantic options while maintaining financial security. I propped the note against the succulent garden that I'd been faithfully watering for 3 years while Harper focused on more important matters like building her social media following and networking with creative professionals who understood what real excitement and passion looked like in ways that apparently escaped someone as boringly reliable as me. I placed my keys beside the note, the physical symbol of access to a life that I'd thought we were building together but that had actually been nothing more than convenient temporary housing while Harper positioned herself for better opportunities with more interesting people who could provide both financial stability and emotional thrills. I carried my belongings down to my reliable Honda Civic in 3 trips, loading the trunk and back seat with the physical remnants of a relationship that had ended the moment Harper had described me as basically single to her coworkers while discussing her strategy for finding someone who understood what real passion looked like. The sun was beginning to rise over downtown Austin as I drove away from our building for the final time, my car packed with everything that actually belonged to me while Harper slept peacefully in the bed I'd helped pay for, completely unaware that her convenient financial safety net had just disappeared and left her fully single in exactly the way she'd claimed to want. I checked into a corporate extended stay hotel near my office and spent 3 days in complete digital silence, ignoring the increasingly frantic buzzing of my phone as I focused on the practical matters of relocating my life and establishing new routines that didn't revolve around subsidizing someone else's lifestyle choices and romantic strategy sessions. My phone sat face down on the hotel desk while I researched apartment listings, updated my address with the bank, and methodically worked through the administrative details of becoming genuinely single instead of just conveniently single like Harper had described our arrangement to her coworkers. On Wednesday evening, curiosity finally got the better of my professional discipline, and I scrolled through the accumulated messages that told the complete story of Harper's evolving understanding of her new situation. The first text had arrived at 11:30 Tuesday morning with casual confusion that suggested she'd initially assumed I was simply running errands or handling work responsibilities like the reliably boring person she'd described me as to her friends at the wine bar. Her message asked where I'd gone and mentioned that she'd noticed my coffee maker was missing, followed by a laughing emoji that indicated she still thought this was some kind of temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent change in her living situation and financial circumstances. By Tuesday afternoon, her tone had shifted to mild concern as she apparently discovered that my clothes were gone and my side of the closet was completely empty, leading to a series of questions about whether I was okay and requests to call her back because she was starting to worry that something serious had happened to me. The messages became more frequent as Tuesday evening arrived and Harper presumably realized that all my belongings had disappeared along with my physical presence, transforming her casual concern into something approaching genuine panic as the reality of her situation began to penetrate her carefully curated worldview. Wednesday morning brought a barrage of longer messages where Harper attempted to explain away her comments at the wine bar as harmless office banter and workplace gossip that didn't reflect her true feelings about our relationship, insisting that I was being overly sensitive about casual conversation that wasn't meant to be taken seriously by someone who supposedly understood her sense of humor and communication style. She tried to reframe her strategic discussion about keeping me around for stability while pursuing better options as simple venting about temporary stress rather than an honest assessment of how she'd been approaching our 3-year relationship and my role as her financial safety net. Her explanations grew increasingly desperate as she attempted to convince me that describing me as basically single to her coworkers was just her way of maintaining professional boundaries rather than an accurate description of how she viewed my importance in her life and future plans. By Wednesday afternoon, Harper's messages revealed her growing awareness that this wasn't a temporary misunderstanding that could be resolved through creative interpretation of her words, but rather a fundamental shift in her circumstances that would require significant adjustments to her lifestyle and financial planning. She began mentioning practical concerns like rent payments and upcoming bills, casual references that revealed how quickly her mind had moved from relationship repair to damage control and resource management. The most telling message came Wednesday evening when Harper finally acknowledged that she might have hurt my feelings but immediately pivoted to discussing how my sudden departure was affecting her ability to maintain the loft and meet her financial obligations, essentially confirming that her primary concern was the loss of my financial contributions rather than the loss of our emotional connection. Her final message of the day attempted to strike a balance between apology and accusation, suggesting that while she understood I might be upset, my reaction was disproportionate to what she characterized as a simple miscommunication that any mature adult would be willing to discuss and resolve through honest conversation about our mutual needs and expectations. I read through the entire sequence with the same analytical detachment I applied to market reports, observing the patterns and progression of her responses as she gradually understood that her convenient arrangement had been permanently disrupted by someone who had finally heard exactly how she viewed their relationship and decided to take her assessment at face value. The following week brought a new wave of messages that revealed how completely Harper's carefully constructed lifestyle was unraveling without my financial support and practical management of our shared responsibilities. She informed me that she'd been forced to move back in with her parents in suburban Round Rock because the downtown loft rent was impossible to manage on her marketing coordinator salary alone, especially after she'd grown accustomed to splitting expenses with someone who handled the larger financial obligations while she focused on building her personal brand. Her messages alternated between bitter complaints about having to downgrade her living situation and desperate attempts to convince me that this temporary setback was affecting her professional image and networking opportunities in Austin's competitive creative scene. She explained how her coworkers were treating her differently now that word had spread about our sudden breakup, with several people asking uncomfortable questions about what had really happened and whether the relationship problems might affect her focus and reliability at work. The professional consequences were apparently more severe than she'd anticipated, as her carefully maintained image of having everything together began to crumble when colleagues realized she couldn't actually afford the lifestyle she'd been projecting without significant financial assistance from someone she'd described as merely convenient placeholder material. Her friend Jenna called me directly on Thursday afternoon, demanding that I step up and be mature about the situation instead of abandoning Harper during what she characterized as a difficult transitional period that required understanding and compromise from both parties. Jenna explained that Harper was struggling both emotionally and financially, sleeping on her childhood bed in her parents' house while trying to maintain her professional responsibilities and social connections despite the dramatic change in her circumstances. She insisted that real men don't just disappear when relationships hit rough patches, and suggested that my sudden departure demonstrated exactly the kind of emotional unavailability and conflict avoidance that probably contributed to our relationship problems in the first place. I listened to Jenna's lecture with complete emotional detachment, noting how she carefully avoided mentioning Harper's actual words at the wine bar or acknowledging that abandoning someone requires there to have been a genuine relationship rather than a convenient financial arrangement that benefited only one party. When Jenna finished her speech about mature communication and second chances, I simply told her that Harper had accurately described our relationship status to her coworkers and I was just making her assessment official rather than continuing to pretend otherwise. Harper's subsequent messages became increasingly unhinged as the full scope of her new reality settled in, ranging from desperate apologies where she claimed to finally understand my value and appreciate everything I'd done for our relationship, to bitter accusations that I was emotionally manipulative and financially controlling for withdrawing my support without proper warning or discussion. She accused me of abandoning her during a vulnerable time when she needed stability and understanding, conveniently forgetting that she'd spent 3 years treating me as a temporary convenience while actively shopping for better romantic options among Austin's creative professionals who understood real passion and excitement. Her final messages of the week revealed the complete transformation of her perspective, as she went from dismissing me as boring and overly practical to claiming that I'd been the best thing in her life and she'd made a terrible mistake by not recognizing my worth before it was too late. The desperation in her words was palpable as she begged me to consider the years we'd spent together and the life we'd built, apparently forgetting that she'd recently described that same life as something she was merely tolerating while waiting for something better to come along and sweep her away from her predictably stable situation. I found a sleek one-bedroom apartment in a high-rise building downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of Lady Bird Lake and the Austin skyline, a space that was entirely mine without any need to coordinate aesthetic choices or accommodate someone else's Instagram requirements. The rent was actually lower than my share of the loft expenses had been, which meant I suddenly had significant disposable income for the first time in 3 years instead of constantly calculating how much I could afford to contribute to Harper's lifestyle and professional image maintenance. I threw myself into advancing my career with the same methodical focus I'd applied to packing my belongings, accepting a senior analyst position at a larger firm that came with a substantial salary increase and opportunities for professional travel to conferences and client meetings across Texas and beyond. The new role challenged me intellectually in ways I'd forgotten were possible, involving complex portfolio analysis and strategic financial planning for high-net-worth clients who appreciated my attention to detail and systematic approach to risk management. I started taking rock climbing lessons at a gym near my office, discovering that I genuinely enjoyed the physical and mental challenge of scaling artificial walls and planning routes that required both strength and strategic thinking. Weekend trips to the limestone cliffs and granite domes scattered throughout the hill country became my new routine, replacing the carefully planned farmers market visits and expensive brunches that had defined my previous relationship schedule. The outdoor climbing community introduced me to people who shared actual interests rather than expecting me to fund their social activities, fellow professionals who worked in tech and finance and enjoyed discussing both market trends and optimal climbing techniques with equal enthusiasm. I began seriously considering the CPA certification program I'd postponed for years because Harper had always complained that my study schedule interfered with our social calendar and her networking events, claiming that my focus on professional development made me boring and overly career-oriented instead of living in the moment. The certification would position me for partnership track opportunities and significantly increase my earning potential, goals that felt achievable now that I wasn't dedicating half my income to subsidizing someone else's lifestyle choices and financial irresponsibility. My evenings became filled with productive activities that actually interested me, from reviewing study materials for the certification exam to researching new climbing destinations and planning weekend adventures that didn't require coordinating with someone who would inevitably find reasons to complain about my methodical approach to trip planning. I discovered that I genuinely enjoyed cooking for myself, experimenting with recipes and ingredients without having to accommodate Harper's constantly changing dietary restrictions and expensive organic preferences that had turned grocery shopping into an exercise in budget management and compromise. The quiet satisfaction of making my own choices without negotiation or justification was remarkably liberating, whether I was deciding to spend Saturday morning reading financial journals instead of attending another networking brunch or choosing to invest in quality climbing gear rather than contributing to someone else's designer handbag collection. My apartment became a space that reflected my actual interests and priorities, filled with finance textbooks, climbing equipment, and the coffee maker that had survived 3 years of shared living and now served only me in peaceful morning routines that didn't involve anyone scrolling through social media or planning their day around avoiding actual work responsibilities. The transformation was remarkable, not just in terms of financial freedom but in rediscovering aspects of myself that had been gradually suppressed during years of trying to be the reliable, boring partner that Harper had needed for stability while she pursued more exciting romantic opportunities with creative professionals who understood what real passion allegedly looked like. 6 months after I'd walked out of that wine bar and into a completely different life, Harper ambushed me at Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road, the small batch roastery that had become my regular Saturday morning destination for quality espresso and peaceful reading time without any need to coordinate schedules or accommodate someone else's social media posting requirements. I was reviewing quarterly reports on my laptop, genuinely enjoying the complex analysis of market trends and portfolio performance, when I noticed her standing beside my table looking significantly different from the polished marketing professional I'd once subsidized through 3 years of shared expenses and lifestyle maintenance. Her usually immaculate appearance had been replaced by something that suggested genuine struggle rather than temporary setback, with dark circles under her eyes and an overall worn-down quality that spoke to months of real consequences and financial pressure rather than the minor inconveniences she'd previously experienced when her credit card balances got uncomfortably high. She'd lost weight in an unhealthy way that made her designer clothes hang awkwardly on her frame, and her normally confident demeanor had been replaced by something desperate and uncertain that I'd never witnessed during our relationship when my financial support had allowed her to maintain her carefully curated image and professional networking lifestyle. She asked if she could sit down with a voice that lacked the entitled expectation I remembered from our shared domestic negotiations, and I gestured to the empty chair across from me with the same polite detachment I'd show to any stranger who needed to share a table during the busy morning rush at Austin's most popular coffee destination. Harper immediately launched into an explanation about how everything had systematically fallen apart since I'd disappeared from her life, starting with her inability to maintain the downtown loft on her marketing coordinator salary alone and continuing through a cascade of professional and personal disasters that had fundamentally altered her circumstances and forced her to confront financial realities she'd previously managed to avoid through my contributions and practical support. She explained that losing a major client at her marketing agency had put her job in serious jeopardy, partly because her supervisors had begun questioning her focus and professional reliability after learning about our sudden breakup and the dramatic change in her living situation that had followed my departure from her life. The professional consequences were apparently more severe and long-lasting than she'd anticipated, as colleagues who had once admired her lifestyle and social media presence now whispered about her inability to maintain the sophisticated image she'd been projecting and whether her personal problems and financial instability might affect her performance on important client accounts that required consistent attention and creative energy. Harper's voice cracked with genuine emotion as she described how her carefully maintained reputation within Austin's competitive marketing community had suffered significant damage when people learned the full story of our breakup, particularly the uncomfortable details about how she'd been describing me to coworkers as temporary placeholder material while actively shopping for better romantic options with more exciting creative professionals who rode motorcycles and understood what real passion looked like. She begged me to consider reconciliation with a desperation that was completely foreign to the confident woman who had once casually dismissed 3 years of our shared life as basically being single while she positioned herself for better opportunities with people who could provide both financial security and emotional excitement simultaneously. Her plea focused heavily on the practical benefits and stability she'd lost rather than any emotional connection or partnership she genuinely missed, as she detailed her current struggles with basic expenses like rent and groceries and the personal humiliation of living with her parents in suburban Round Rock while trying to rebuild her professional credibility and social standing among the creative community that had once accepted her as an equal. The conversation revealed how completely and fundamentally she'd misunderstood the actual foundation of our relationship, as she spoke about our 3 years together primarily in terms of the lifestyle and financial opportunities I'd provided rather than any genuine partnership, emotional bond, or shared vision for the future that she valued for its own sake beyond the material benefits it had offered. Harper promised repeatedly that she'd changed and learned to value the right things, but her specific examples focused almost exclusively on appreciating my financial contributions and practical reliability rather than developing any actual interest in my goals, personality, professional aspirations, or the future we might build together as equal partners who both contributed something meaningful to the relationship. I listened to her entire presentation with complete emotional detachment and analytical distance, observing her desperation with the same objective perspective I'd apply to studying market volatility or assessing investment risks that might negatively affect client portfolios and require strategic adjustments to minimize potential losses. When she finished her carefully rehearsed pitch for reconciliation, I calmly explained that her current struggles and financial difficulties were simply the natural and predictable consequences of her own choices and the brutally honest assessment she'd shared with her coworkers about our relationship being nothing more than a temporary convenience while she positioned herself for better opportunities with more exciting people. I told her that losing her financial safety net wasn't a tragedy or unfair punishment but rather the logical outcome of treating someone as disposable placeholder material while actively seeking to replace them with more thrilling alternatives who could provide both security and passion simultaneously without requiring her to settle for boring stability. Harper broke down crying when she finally realized that my emotional detachment was complete and permanent rather than a negotiating tactic or temporary punishment that could be overcome through sufficient desperation and promises of future appreciation for my contributions to her lifestyle and professional image. Her tears were genuine this time, raw and uncontrolled, not the strategic emotional displays she'd occasionally used during our relationship when she needed something expensive or wanted to avoid difficult conversations about her spending habits and long-term contributions to our supposed partnership and shared future goals. I maintained my composed demeanor throughout Harper's complete emotional breakdown, making it absolutely clear that her current problems were no longer my concern and that I had moved completely beyond any investment in her well-being or future success in Austin's competitive marketing landscape. I explained that she had accurately assessed our relationship status during her conversation at the wine bar, describing me as basically single and merely convenient for handling practical responsibilities while she pursued more exciting romantic opportunities with creative professionals who understood real passion, and I had simply made her honest evaluation official by removing myself from the equation entirely. Her desperate sobbing and pleading held no emotional weight for me anymore, as I had processed the mathematical reality that someone who could casually dismiss 3 years of shared life while strategically positioning themselves for better options had never been genuinely committed to building anything meaningful together beyond a temporary financial arrangement. I told her that I hoped she would eventually find what she was really looking for in terms of passion and excitement with someone who rode motorcycles and appreciated her aesthetic sensibilities. But I knew with absolute certainty that it would never again involve me serving as someone's reliable placeholder or convenient financial safety net while they shopped for superior alternatives among Austin's creative community and professional networking events. Standing up from the coffee shop table, I gathered my laptop and financial reports with the same methodical precision I had used to pack my belongings 6 months earlier, demonstrating that this conversation was definitively concluded rather than the beginning of any negotiation or reconciliation process that might restore her access to my practical support and financial contributions to her lifestyle maintenance. Harper continued crying and calling my name as I walked toward the exit, but her voice seemed to come from a great distance, like hearing someone else's problems discussed in a business meeting that had no relevance to my current priorities or future planning objectives. I stepped out into the bright Texas morning sunlight feeling absolutely no trace of the love that had once consumed my thoughts and motivated my financial sacrifices for her professional image and social media presence. Only a profound sense of personal freedom and self-respect that came from finally understanding my actual worth rather than accepting someone else's dismissive assessment of my value as temporary convenience material. The warmth of the Austin sunshine on my face felt like a physical manifestation of the liberation I had achieved through my methodical removal from a situation where I had been systematically undervalued and strategically positioned for eventual replacement by someone who could provide both financial security and emotional excitement simultaneously. My future stretched ahead filled with authentic relationships and genuine possibilities, completely unburdened by the psychological weight of serving as someone's backup plan or the financial drain of subsidizing another person's expensive lifestyle while they actively pursued better romantic options among people who understood what real spontaneity and creative passion supposedly looked like. I walked to my reliable Honda Civic with steady steps and clear purpose, knowing that I would never again compromise my self-respect by remaining in a relationship where my primary value was measured in terms of practical utility and financial contribution rather than genuine partnership, mutual appreciation, and shared commitment to building something meaningful together. The person I had become through this painful but educational experience was stronger, more self-aware, and significantly wealthier than the man who had once eagerly planned surprise dinner reservations for someone who described him as basically single to her coworkers while discussing her strategy for finding better romantic opportunities.